Hello there, welcome to part 3 of tricky and vague PMP exam questions. Today we're talking about a very important topic. It's PMP exam change request questions. You are bound to have change request questions on the PMP exam because one of the most difficult things for the PM is managing change. So let's take a look here at what I call the change request sequence according to the dogma and doctrine of the PMI. First of all, the customer asks for a change. Now, is that change in a formal change request document? Is it in the medium that has been approved by the organization for change requests? That's what you should ask yourself first. And if it's not in that medium, then ask for the request in formal writing. The next step is to enter that change request into the change log, even before you begin to work on it. Get a change request and enter it into the change log. Record the information that you have so far about the change request. The next thing you should do is, as a PM, analyze that change request, assess the change request, perform an analysis on that change request along with the team where necessary. After performing your analysis, the next step is to send the change request and the analysis that you just carried out to the change control board for review. The change control board, is talked about in the perform integrated change control process. So right here, as we have the change request coming into this process as an input along with the analysis, it will be reviewed by the CCB, and the change control board will spend time taking a look at the analysis that the project manager handed in, along with the change request. And at the same time, don't forget, one of the inputs to performing integrated change control is called work performance reports, because the change control board may want to know what the current performance is before approving another request to go through the pipeline. Perhaps the team is not performing as well as they should. Well, another change request, an unneeded change request, could send them even further off schedule. So at times, it would take both the analysis and the change request and current performance information to convince the CCB as to whether to approve or reject a change request. Takes us to step 7, the actual approval or the rejection by the change control board. At that point, the project manager should record the outcome of the CCB's review in the change log. Has it been approved or rejected? Or is it in pending status or on hold? Once the change log is updated, as you are in the stakeholder management processes, you want to think about sharing the change log, specifically in managed stakeholder engagement, because stakeholders want to be engaged by understanding changes that they asked for, changes that could impact them and affect their interest on the project. So share the change log information and the outcome of the change control board review with the other stakeholders. After that has been done, of course, you're going to be expecting to see the implementation of a change request that was approved, or perhaps not, if it's not approved. But step 10 is the implementation of the approved change request. So the change request, now approved, is implemented And this is where we need to make updates to plans or deliverables. Remember, approved change request is an input to direct and manage project work, and at the same time, it goes to control quality. I talk about all this in a different video, but the reason is as you are carrying out an inspection, you want to make sure that what you are inspecting aligns with the approved change request. Approved change requests, like I said, are also an input to direct and manage project work. So please be aware of that. Now, the next step here is to update the change log yet again. Update the log with validated changes information. As part of the control quality process, you have approved change requests as an input. You also have a tool and technique known as approved change request review. Approved change request review is a tool and technique of control quality to ensure that any approved change request is inherent in the deliverable being checked. And that's how you get a verified deliverable out. And if you get a verified deliverable out on, let's say, the second go round, then you should have validated changes updated in your change log. So validated changes are documented proof that that approved change request is now inherent in the deliverable. Okay, so I hope that helps you with the overall framework for the change request sequence. Take a look at it, get it down, understand it, know the logic and all the associated inputs and outputs that you see along with these steps. Okay, next, let's talk about what happens when a change is already made. So, a change has been made, blah, blah, blah. What do you do? So ask yourself, looking at the question, what has changed? Don't blindly stop work. That usually is a bogus option, and I talked about this in the first video. You don't want to do that. You want to go to the next step and ask, why did it change? What has changed, and why did it change? After you understand why it did change, your next step is to analyze. What is the impact? What are the risk impacts? Schedule, cost, so on. Analyze what the impacts are if it hasn't already been done. The next step is, after you've analyzed the impact, ask the question, was this a risk acceptance measure? Or is this the application of a contingency of some sort or a fallback? Maybe a fallback plan or a workaround. So when a change has been implemented, it could be as a result of risk acceptance, it could be as a result of a contingency being applied, or it could be as a result of a fallback plan or even a workaround. So the question sets you up to think that the change is bad, but it may not be bad. The change may be a deliberate action. Remember, we talked about preventive action, corrective action, and defect repair. So if it's corrective action, it may not be a bad thing. Maybe you did change something as a coping mechanism. So always ask that question. The next step is, if yes, if it is a risk mitigation or risk contingency approach, then what should you do? Update the relevant project documents, including the risk register, because maybe it's a risk coping mechanism and you might need to document that your risk response was effective or not. You might need to actually think about a risk audit of sorts. What about if it's not? Well, if it's not a risk measure and it's not in line with the contract or the SOW, then weigh all options for minimal effect. You want to make sure that what has changed will have a minimal effect on the project. So if it's not a risk measure and it's not in line with the SOW, before you take action, weigh your options for how you're going to address this change, this unneeded or unauthorized change. Okay, then the next step is to reverse all unauthorized changes because you cannot leave unauthorized changes on the project. They need to be weeded out. So once you've found how to minimize the effect of uprooting those changes, then reverse those unauthorized changes because as the PM, you cannot leave them on the project. Okay? In part 4, we'll be taking a look at more ways to coping with these tricky and vague questions. Look for the video, and I'll see you in the next video.